The sun had baked the earth into cracked porcelain long before morning light slid across Elias Ward's ranch, and by noon the whole borderland seemed to simmer. A pale haze hovered over the distance where parched buffalo grass met the sky, and the wind smelled of dust and old bones. Elias rode the fence line at a slow walk, reins loose, hat brim pulled low, letting the gelding pick careful steps along scorched earth. The north posts needed mending. Wire sagged where spring floods had dragged debris against it, and a coyote burrow had opened under the eastern corner. But he fixed things in his own time. One problem per turn of the sun, because all hurried labor in his life had once led to blood. He wore a faded gray shirt, thin at the elbows, sleeves rolled despite the heat to reveal arms string-muscled. From years of roping calves and hauling water. Every so often he shifted in the saddle, patterns of old pain flaring where a Confederate bullet had entered at Shiloh and forever reminded him that loyalty to flags had limits. He'd dressed the wound himself back then, alone beside a swampy ditch, and had later buried 3 young soldiers who'd called him sir the night before. None of them older than 20. A bottlefly buzzed past his ear. Just beyond a tumble of sagebrush to the south, something else moved, something that wasn't wind. Elias halted the horse with a soft pull and listened. At first he heard nothing but cicadas. Then, faint and ragged, came a moan that he dismounted. The gelding's reins brushed dry pebbles as Elias pushed through knee-high weeds to the lip of a shallow ravine once carved by flash floods. Heat radiated off the ground like stove plates. Down in the hollow, tangled in dead tumbleweed, lay a young native man. The boy's chest rose in short, uneven jerks. Dark blood caked one shoulder where cloth, or perhaps buckskin, had been cut away. A wide gash sliced from clavicle to ribs. Crimson had turned black against sun-hardened flesh. Elias's first instinct was caution. The borderland between ranch claims and tribal hunting ground was a powder trail. A wounded scout could be bait for ambush. He scanned the ridge, only horizon and shimmering distance. Yet the boy's eyes, half open, glazed with fever, contained no cunning, only bewildered pain. That a memory struck Elias unbidden. Winter, 3 years earlier, a cavalry officer shouting orders to torch a village because a single arrow had pierced a trooper's coat. Elias had refused, had stepped between torches and teepees, and the captain's eyes had gone cold like a man who discovers a snake in his boot. The dishonorable discharge that followed had not killed Elias, but it had drained the last taste of pride from soldiering. Since then he'd spoken maybe a dozen sentences a day, most of them to the gelding or the stray dog that haunted his porch. That he knelt now, boots crunching dirt, heart thudding. "Easy," he murmured, not sure if the boy understood English, and not caring whether the scrub around them concealed sharpshooters. He unslung his canteen, uncorked it, pressed cool tin to cracked lips. The youth coughed, water spilling down his chin, then gulped again, eyes closing with a soft sound of relief. Elias examined the wound. Edges were jagged, perhaps from a shattered Spencer round. Infection had already set in. He dug in his saddlebag, pulled a roll of clean muslin, and tore strips with calloused fingers. The boy flinched as Elias poured the last of the canteen over the gash, washing out grit and dried blood. "I know it burns," Elias said, voice hoarse from disuse. "Stay with me." He laced the bandage tight, nodding at the back, then lifted the youth's head to slide a folded blanket beneath. Every movement left sweat dripping from Elias's temples onto the cracked earth. Above them, a vulture traced lazy circles. Elias pictured what the frontier did to the helpless. Coyotes tugging at shoelaces, sun cooking flesh until skin split. He reached for his extra tarp, a piece of canvas he carried for fencing repairs, propped stick props to give a sliver of shade. When the boy's breathing evened to shallow sleep, Elias rose, wiping bloody palms against dusty trousers. He studied the distant mesas. None of this would stay hidden. Footprints and hoof prints told their stories. Someone would come looking, family, scouts, or warriors. If they found their kinsmen alive beneath a rancher's canvas, gratitude might follow. Or suspicion. Or justice in the form of a lance across Elias Ward's spine. The gelding whickered. Elias turned, dust sliding off his boots, climbed back into the saddle, knees aching. He left the canteen, empty but symbolic, beside the boy's hand. The ride home stretched long beneath a lowering sun. Orange light gilded fence wire and flared off distant buttes, turning the sky the color of split artery. Each hoofbeat echoed the question he did not dare voice. Had he merely postponed death, his or the boys? Halfway to the ranch house, the land dipped into rolling flats where shadows lengthened like reaching fingers. Elias kept seeing flashes of past battles, a riverbank glowing with muzzle fire, children crying near toppled teepees, a colonel praising swift retribution. He remembered the stink of kerosene and charred buffalo robes. Against that memory, the small kindness of offering water felt like a twig thrown into a canyon, insignificant, yet echoing on and on to be why the time would smoke. From his own chimney came into view. Stars already pricked the bruised purple sky. Elias dismounted slowly, muscles stiff, slid the saddle off his gelding, and patted the animal's neck as though thanking a mute friend who shared secrets. Inside the cabin, lamplight revealed walls bare of decoration save an old Springfield rifle leaning by the door, cleaned but rarely fired. He poured himself a tin cup of stale coffee, hands trembling. In the silence rattling around the room, he felt the weight of what dawn might bring. Riders on the horizon, dust devils swirling ahead of painted faces, cries for blood. He pictured his own grave marker, perhaps nothing but a crossed pair of cedar branches, and wondered if the dog would wait beside it. Yet, beneath the fear, there was a steadier feeling, a coolness like spring water in the throat of a man half dead from thirst. Compassion was a debt paid forward, whether or not the world balanced its ledgers. Elias set the cup down, extinguished the lamp, and stood at the window. The moon had risen, silvering the land, tracing the fence lines he had spent years mending. Somewhere out there, under canvas and blanket, a wounded young warrior breathed on the edge of tomorrow. Elias Ward exhaled, the sound like a prayer. He had not chosen war when it found him. Today he had chosen something else. Come sunrise, be it vengeance or gratitude, he would meet it with the same calm resolve that guided his hands around a frayed bandage. Out on the plains, a lone coyote yipped at the night. Elias listened a moment, then whispered back, "Let the dawn decide." The first light of dawn painted the plains in a thin strip of pale gold when a low, rhythmic thunder rolled across Elias Ward's dreams. He surfaced with a start, half believing it was a cannonade from some battle relived in sleep. But the sound grew steady, hoofbeats, layered like drumlines, rising from the valley floor. He pulled on dusty boots, grabbed his rifle from beside the door, and pushed onto the front porch. In the lifting half-light, he saw them crest the far ridge, a long column of riders outlined against the brightening sky, dust swirling around their horses' legs. At the lead rode 3 spear-bearing warriors, paint and feathers catching dawn fire. Behind them moved elders wrapped in deerskin robes, women with braided hair, children clinging to saddle blankets. No guns flashed, no arrows notched, yet the silence traveled faster than any war cry. The tribe closed distance without a single shout, hooves muffled by the dust they kicked into a glowing halo. Elias cradled the rifle, thumb brushing the worn edge of its breech, but kept the muzzle pointed downward. When the first horses reached his yard, he saw familiar eyes among the crowd. The young warrior from yesterday sat slumped on a dappled mare, torso swathed in fresh bandages, his face pale but alive. 2 riders flanked him like sentries. Beside that trio rode a broad-shouldered man whose plaited hair was streaked with gray. Around his neck hung a hammered silver crescent. His expression was unreadable, not anger, not gratitude, something heavier. The riders drew up in a broad semicircle. A breeze rattled the tin patch on Elias's roof, and the gelding in the corral snorted. Still nobody spoke. Dust settled on boot tops and horse fetlocks, and time felt stretched so thin it might tear. A small, wiry elder swung down first, knees stiff, but his eyes bright. He carried no weapon. He stepped onto Elias's porch and lifted a palm in greeting. "Morning," he said in slow, careful English. The accent suggested decades of trading posts and treaty councils. Elias nodded, fingers easing from the rifle stock. "Morning." The elder gestured to the gray-haired man. "This is Chief. 2 stones." Then a motion toward the boy on the mare. "His son, Sparrow Hawk." The elder's gaze returned to Elias, searching. You brought him back from the edge of death. Elias swallowed. Gave him water. Wrapped a bandage, is all. The chief dismounted with fluid grace that belied his age. He walked to his son, steadied the young man's leg while another warrior lifted the boy to the ground. Sparrow Hawk's knees trembled. Blood had soaked through one edge of the linen, but the wound looked clean. The chief helped him stand, hand gentle at the boy's elbow. Only then did he step forward, eyes never leaving Elias. The elder translated in a low voice. You passed our son to new dawn. You carry medicine of kindness. Now the road turns. You will ride with us. Elias let the words settle like distant thunder. He glanced at the rifle, heavy, suddenly useless, and propped it upright against a porch post. The dog, sensing uneasy strangers, whined from inside the doorway, but Elias raised a hand to calm him. He faced the chief. If my coming brings peace, I'll go, he said. The elder relayed the statement. The chief answered, and the elder translated again. Judgment belongs to the spirits, not to rifles. Come, learn what your hands have started. Though the elder's tone remained measured, Elias sensed a gravity that suggested the tribe's motives were broader than gratitude or vengeance, something ceremonial, perhaps, or communal. The stakes had leapt beyond one man's ranch. He stepped off the porch. Sparrow Hawk looked up, eyes bright despite exhaustion. A fractional nod passed between them. Recognition, fragile trust. Elias lifted his canteen, slung it over his shoulder, and whistled the gelding to the gate. He left, the dog barking behind the screen door, knowing the animal would wait for his return or perish loyal in the yard. The rifle stayed leaning in the morning sun. A warrior offered Elias a spare horse, tall roan, reins braided in rawhide. Elias mounted, adjusting to a rangy stride he hadn't ridden since army days. The column shifted, hooves crunching gravel. Women guided pack ponies laden with rawhide water bags. Children rode double behind older siblings. A pair of elders carried long cedar poles lashed with painted hides, portable shelter, perhaps ceremonial. They moved out at a walk, leaving Elias's cabin small and lonely behind a rising trail of dust. The day warmed quickly. Sunlight caught spear points and horse manes, scattering gold flakes into the air. The riders spoke in low voices that slid in and out of Elias's limited understanding. He let the cadence wash over him, listening for its music even if the meaning escaped. After a few miles, the prairie gave way to broken mesas. Sage left off and red sand took over, strewn with sun-whitened bones of cattle that had perished in last year's drought. The horizon stretched like a taut bowstring. Elias realized he didn't know if he'd return by nightfall, or ever. But the dread that had haunted him through decades of war and shame felt strangely distant now. A different chord vibrated in his chest, anticipation, or perhaps a bell of justice he had avoided hearing. Sparrow Hawk rode beside him for a time, back straight despite pain. The youth spoke halting English learned at a mission school. You put sky in my throat, he said, tapping his canteen as if recalling that first swallow of water. Elias managed a thin smile. They lapsed into silence that held weight, not awkwardness. Mid-morning, they reached a wind-scoured plateau. Below, another valley yawned, copper and ochre cliffs glowing. At its center snaked a shallow river, the first glint of water Elias had seen beyond his ranch in months. The column halted. The chief raised an arm, and several riders broke away, galloping ahead to signal others unseen. Elias realized then this procession was only a fraction of the tribe. Scouts and outriders flanked them beyond each ridge, invisible until called. The elder riding close turned to Elias. Soon, you will stand where the river meets painted stone. There, words are weighed. His gaze flicked to the horizon. Do not fear. The truth you carry will speak. Elias nodded, dust crusting his lips. He stared out over the immense land, brighter and harsher than any battlefield he'd known. He thought of his porch, the empty rifle, the dog pacing circles in confusion, and knew that part of his life had already fallen away like a shed skin. The column started down the switchbacks, hooves dislodging pebbles that skipped into ravines. Ahead, faint drums pulsed, a heartbeat carried on wind. Elias shifted in the saddle, feeling each step echo through his old war wound, a reminder that he had walked much of his life toward this unnamed reckoning. And yet, riding here among strangers who held no weapons against him, he felt, for the first time in years, an unsteady flicker of belonging. The desert swallowed them, and the dust they raised drifted back toward the ranch like a silent, distant signal. Everything was changing, and there was no turning home the same man who had left. They reached the canyon at dusk, when the sun's last flare poured molten copper down scarlet walls and set the world ringing with cicada song. Wind threaded through high arches and narrow chutes, turning the stone itself into a hollow flute. Petroglyphs, spirals, thunderbirds, warriors with upraised spears, glowed as if painted fresh each time daylight bowed out. Elias had never seen color so alive. The rocks seemed to breathe, to remember. The riders dismounted without commands. Bedrolls unfurled, fires bloomed, horses watered at a shallow bend of river that had scoured its bed into polished slate. Though no rope bound him, Elias felt the invisible circle of watchful eyes. A warrior gestured to a flat patch of sand near the main fire. Elias laid his bedroll there and sat cross-legged, palms open on his knees, trying not to flinch at the prickle of scrutiny. Chief Two Stones stood across the flames, cedar smoke curling around braids streaked in silver. "We need to know the measure of your heart," the elder interpreter translated. "Not by how you speak one day, but by how you live many." Then the chief raised two fingers, signaling time, and walked away as so the days unfolded like pages in a weather-worn ledger. At dawn, Elias helped hobble ponies and patch a split rawhide water bag. He hauled driftwood up from the riverbank, stacked stones for a new cook fire, spliced fraying rope for a travois. No one ordered him. Tasks simply appeared, and joining them felt natural, like tightening fence wire back at the ranch. Except here strangers nodded approval with their eyes. When the sun climbed high, he answered questions beneath a juniper's thin shade. A semicircle of elders listened while the interpreter guided the exchange. They wanted stories, not confessions, moments that revealed marrow. Elias spoke of Tennessee hills where he'd herded cattle before the war, of Shiloh's mud and the deafening hum inside his skull after an artillery barrage. He described the smell of kerosene and screaming horses the night his cavalry captain ordered torches thrown onto lodges where women and children slept. "I aimed my rifle at the lieutenant, who struck the first match," Elias said, voice cracked from telling. "I fired over his head, not at him, but it was enough. They dragged me in irons to Fort Garland and stamped coward across the ledger." He met the chief's unmoving gaze. "I'd rather be a coward than watch flame eat cradle boards." The interpreter fell silent a long moment, translating in slow syllables. An old woman with clouded eyes reached out, pressed two fingers against the inside of Elias's wrist, as if confirming his pulse still beat true, and gave a single nod. Each evening the canyon cooled. Sparrow Hawk, arms still bound, limped to Elias's fire. His English improved daily. Pain had loosened the tongue that fever first silenced. He spoke of older brothers lost on hunts, of songs sung to the night horses so they wouldn't spook at ghosts wandering ridge tops. One night he asked the question no elder had voiced. "Why did you stop for me?" Elias poked the fire, sparks spiraling into violet dusk. "Because I was thirsty once, and a stranger lowered his canteen. I never knew his name. Shot took him an hour later. Somebody has to break the circle." He didn't add how often he had failed at that simple act since. Sparrowhawk listened, then reached inside a pouch at his belt. He placed something small and pale in Elias's hand, a carving no bigger than a knuckle, shaped like a running deer. The stone was smooth but bore a faint red vein through its center. "Truth token," the youth said. "Carry it, speak straight. When you lie, the stone grows heavy." He grinned as though half teasing, but reverence softened his eyes. Elias closed fingers around the gift, felt warmth where the boy's palm had touched it. On the seventh night, moon a silver cutout, canyon walls black as unshuttered windows, the tribe gathered in a wide circle. Cedar boughs smoldered in the center, smoke twisting into ropey blue columns. Drums whispered rather than thundered. A low hum rose, older than borders. Women sprinkled pinches of ground sage on the coals. The scent, sharp, clean, washed over Elias until his heartbeat slowed to match the drum's quiet cadence. Chief Two Stones stepped forward, carrying a rawhide strip painted with two parallel red bars. The interpreter murmured these lines: "Mark paths, the road of war, the road of mercy." The chief laid the strip across Elias's open palms. Smoke curled between Elias's fingers, stinging his eyes, and for a breath he saw flickering ghosts. Villages blazing, river water running. Red. The blank look on a drummer boy's face before he toppled in mud. Two stones dipped a cedar branch in the fire's ember pocket, touched its glowing tip to the war path. One bar of paint hissed, turned brown, flaked away. The elder spoke softly. The interpreter said, "Let the scorch be the last wound you bear for deeds not yours." Then the chief traced a finger along the remaining red bar. "Walk this one," the interpreter finished, "until it, too, becomes earth." Silence followed, deep and ringing. Elias felt something loosened behind his breastbone, a knot pulled tight since the day shackles bit his wrists at Fort Garland. He bowed his head, unsure if gratitude could cross so many languages. When the ceremony ended, people drifted to their fires. An elder woman pressed a gourd of water into Elias's hands. Sparrow Hawk clasped his shoulder. The interpreter merely smiled, as though translation had finally become needless. Later, lying beneath cliffs etched by ancients, Elias held the stone deer against his sternum. The canyon walls glowed with starshine, every petroglyph casting a faint shadow much older than history books. Wind carried cedar smoke away from camp in long, ghostly ribbons. For the first time in decades, he let his eyelids fall without fearing what dreams might come. If the stone grew heavier, he could not feel it. Sleep, clean and unburdened, settled over him like a quilt sewn from night and forgiveness. They rode out of the red canyon before sunrise, hooves whispering over sand cooled by night. Sparrow Hawk was in the saddle now, shoulders straighter, bandaged down to a single strip. Elias rode beside him, and behind them came a small party: chief, 2 stones, the interpreter, 3 warriors, 2 women with pack ponies, and a pair of laughing children who had begged to see the settlers' land, where kindness lived. They carried cedar poles, tools wrapped in buffalo hide, and a hollowed log drum whose heartbeat kept the horses calm. The journey back took 2 days. They camped once beneath a bluff where moonlight turned every sage leaf to silver. Elias shared coffee grounds while Sparrow Hawk sang a river song under his breath. By the second afternoon, the familiar shape of Ward Ranch rose from the horizon, fence posts and windmill blades shimmering like mirages. Heat waves danced off the earth, yet something in Elias felt cool, as though that cedar smoke still spiraled inside his ribs. When they crested the final ridge, the dog barked frantically from the porch and then, recognizing his master, yipped circles of delight around the horses. Elias dismounted and scratched him behind the ears. "Easy, Scout. We've got company." The warriors grinned at the display, and one tossed the dog a scrap of dried venison. Elias led them first to the neglected spring that once fed his cattle troughs. Years of drought had clogged the channel with silt and tumbleweed. Chief 2 Stones crouched, pressed a hand to damp sand, and nodded as if greeting an old friend. "Water still dreams here," the interpreter said, translating the chief's quiet observation. They set to work. Elias fetched shovels, a broken-handled pickaxe, and an iron pry bar. Sparrow Hawk took a shovel and, ignoring Elias's protest, planted his bare feet in the mud and began carving a channel upstream. The children hauled stones. Women lashed willow branches into a makeshift screen to strain debris. Warriors drove cedar stakes, and Elias used the pry bar to loosen compacted earth until clear water seeped, then trickled. Then our by twilight a thin stream flowed into a sun-bleached trough. It was cracked, leaking in half a dozen places. Elias remembered a spare plank in the barn rafters and pointed it out. Sparrow Hawk followed, and together they rummaged through cobwebs and owl pellets until they found usable boards, iron nails, and a bent horseshoe they hammered flat for reinforcement. Laughter echoed off the rafters when Sparrow Hawk misjudged a nail and mashed his thumb. Elias handed him a rag and teased him in halting Navajo phrases the boy had been teaching him along the trail. Each mistake earned grins instead of scowls. The following morning the tribe's drums sounded over the valley, steady, slow, as elders mixed red ochre with linseed oil to paint symbols along the new plank trough. Elias watched. On one side, a thunderbird stretched wings over spiral waves. On the other, Sparrow Hawk carefully etched a brand iron likeness of Elias's cattle mark, but he inverted it, mirroring the thunderbird so their wings touched in the middle. Elias offered his pocket knife for fine lines, and the boy worked until the designs met like clasped hands. That afternoon, settlers from neighboring homesteads arrived one by one, drawn by smoke columns and rumor. They came armed, wary. Months earlier, some had lost stock to raids, and fear walked with them like a second shadow. Elias met them at the gate, palms visible, explaining in plain words what had taken shape: a shared spring, a neutral crossing, water for any creature under the high sun. He did not mention ceremonies or burnt war paths. He only said, "My land's big enough for goodwill and grass both." Chief Two Stones stepped forward, unarmed, and spoke in his own tongue. The interpreter relayed, "Water is the first mother. She will not choose one child over another." Silence hung while dust settled on boot tips. Then Farley Adams, the surliest rancher in 5 counties, cleared his throat, spat, and muttered, "Cows die thirsty. Kids don't." He leaned his rifle against a post and offered calloused hands to help lift the finished trough into place. Others followed, laying tools aside. Suspicion did not vanish, but it loosened like a knot that had been pulled one turn too tight. By evening, the ditch ran full. Children from both worlds splashed shoeless where willow roots cooled the flow. A settler girl braided a prairie daisy into a tribal boy's hair. He responded by teaching her to skip stones across the widening pool. Mothers watched, arms folded, smiles reluctant but real. The drumbeat shifted to a faster rhythm, echoing. Laughter. Even the wary warriors softened, leaning spears against fence rails while inspecting a calf born the week before. Elias and Sparrow Hawk carried the last plank of cedar to the barn. Together they mended the warped door, straightened hinges, replaced a rotted sill. At one point, Sparrow Hawk paused, brow furrowed, studying the structure. "Your roof needs new bones," he said, nudging a beam with his shoulder. Elias chuckled. "One season at a time." They worked until sweat salted their shirts and the scent of switchgrass drifted through gaps the evening sun painted gold. When tools were stowed, Elias fetched scrap pine from the woodpile and a carving knife dulled by years of fence paring. On the porch, he began shaping letters while the dog dozed at his boots. Sparrow Hawk joined, sanding edges smooth with a piece of river slate. By dawn, the words stood clear: shared water, shared earth. They set the sign on 2 posts at the head of the spring. Settlers and tribespeople gathered in a loose half-circle as Chief Two Stones poured a gourd of clear water along each post, blessing cedar, pine, and all creatures that would drink beneath. No speeches followed. The splash of children and lowing of cattle filled the hush. Later, as stars flirted with the high desert sky, Elias settled into the porch chair he'd once considered an exile's throne. His hat tipped back, brim brushing the wall, and the dog's head rested on his boot. From here, he saw a torchlight flicker where tribal tints mingled with wagon flaps, heard the unlikely braid of languages sharing songs over cook fires, smelled mesquite smoke and beef stew and juniper all tangled into one breathing night. Sparrow Hawk stood by the trough, moonlight silvering his freshly healed scar. He looked toward Elias, lifted the stone deer in salute, then tucked it into a buckskin pouch and joined a circle of laughing settlers. The boy's silhouette merged with others until Elias couldn't tell which voice belonged to whom. Only that there were many, and they echoed each other without fear. Something easy loosened in Elias's chest, like a gate unlatched at last. He brushed dust from his sleeves, thinking of the canyon, of cedar smoke, of the day he knelt in a ravine because a stranger's thirst mirrored his own. Behind him, the house sighed with evening cool, boards creaking as if grateful to be needed. Again, he closed his eyes a moment, listening to water run where once only wind had whispered. When he spoke, no one was near enough to hear. Yet the words felt etched into the dark the way thunderbirds marked stone. It started with water. It ended with something worth more.